Hi everyone, good morning. Nice to see you all here. Just bear with me while I get set up. You guys know the drill. Okay, let's see. Oh, excellent. It works today. Whilst I'm getting everything sorted, why not you tell me how your last 2 weeks has gone, since it has actually been 2 weeks since I've seen all of you. Oh, come on, Facebook. Don't do this to me today. Okay. All right, we're on. Great. Leave me a message, say hi. Let me know how you're doing and what you've been up to in the last 2 weeks. I'm so sorry for having had to cancel on you guys last week. I was actually in self-quarantine and I wasn't feeling too great. Without getting into details, wasn't feeling fantastic. So I was in self-quarantine and that has just ended. Yay! So I'm back out in the world again. So as a result of being in self-quarantine, I missed Kechara Soup Kitchen rounds for 2 weeks. Last night and last Saturday. So I'm hoping to be back this week. But if you guys volunteer for any causes, then happy belated International Volunteers Day, which was yesterday. And so what's been happening? Hi Joyce, hi Piroj. What's been happening? If you are a citizen of Malaysia, a resident of Malaysia following Malaysian news, I don't know why you'd be following Malaysian news if you're not Malaysian, but the CMCO has the lockdown has been lifted for most states except for 3 or 4, I think. Yay! And interstate travel again is allowed again with some caveats. So I'm not going to list them all down here because not particularly interesting to most of you, but that's fun. So if you guys are able to, please do come by Kechara Forest Retreat. We're open again to volunteer with the mantra rolling and with tata making for the Tsemrimchi relic stupas, which are coming up early next year, I believe. So if you guys are able to come by KFR to take part in mantra rolling and tata making for the Tsemrimchi relic stupa project, what else is going on? Tsongkhapa Day, which is coming up next week, I believe. If you guys haven't already made your offerings and haven't already sponsored your offerings, all of the details are on the Kechara Facebook page, as well as on vajrasecrets.com, as well as on kechara.com. Alright, so do that quickly, get that done before Lama Tsongkhapa Day comes around. And Chinese New Year is coming out next year. I don't know what Chinese New Year is going to look like in 2021, because of the whole pandemic thing. So I'm going to assume that most people won't be able to go back to their hometowns for their reunion dinners to celebrate the Lunar New Year. But fingers crossed, things get better soon, right? Considering that there's now a vaccine approved in the UK. And then last thing before we get started, I don't know if you guys have been watching, JP's been doing his paranormal live streamings with the host of the Paranormal Zone, Peng Lee Kim, and JP's been doing that on the Tsem Rinpoche Paranormal Zone page. That's on Thursdays at 10 p.m. Malaysian time. So what happens is they stream one of Lee Kim's old episodes of the Paranormal Zone, which used to be on TV. So they stream that, followed by a discussion of it. So that's coming up, all right? Okay, so very quickly before we get started, good morning, Xiao Li. Hi, thank you for joining us this morning. So very quickly before we get started, I'm so happy that Facebook's not buggy today, but fingers crossed, we'll see how long this lasts for. Very quickly before we get properly started today, as usual, going to do a short prayer to dedicate and to ascribe the source of the information that's going to be shared today. You would think that by this time I would have memorized the introduction, but I haven't, okay? I keep having to recall it every time. But yeah, before we get started properly on today, I'm going to do a quick prayer to ascribe the source of the information that's going to be shared today, as per tradition. I go for refuge in my Lama, from whom I've received these teachings. I go for refuge in the lineage Lamas, from whom my Lama has received these teachings. All right, great. So thank you guys very much for being with me here today after a 2-week absence. Hope you guys have had an interesting 2 weeks and you've been up to lots. Before I get into the topic of today's sharing, which is dealing with difficult people, I'm going to do a short recap of what we talked about 2 weekends ago, just in case you guys have forgotten. So 2 weeks ago, I answered a couple of questions from you guys, and thought that I would go through the answers to refresh your memory. And the first question was, hi Pastor Jean, lately at work I was at the receiving end of very sarcastic statements, even though I had worked hard to try to complete off the work as well and as much as possible. This came from my boss, who was also once an close ex-colleague of mine. Colleague of mine. Don't get me wrong, I totally respect that she's my boss now and understand boundaries, but I didn't so much felt anger, I felt very hurt. Even so, I told myself I must persevere and continue. I just felt that if this continued for me, it may not be good for me emotionally at the end of the day. Right, so good morning, Kong Sekurat. I am so sorry if I mispronounced your name. And good morning, Agnes Sawadika. So yeah, 2 weeks ago we talked about how to deal with the change in dynamics when someone who was formerly your peer, formerly a workmate, formerly a colleague, morning Penny, has been promoted to become your boss. So if I recall correctly, this question was asked by Margaret Koo, and 2 weeks ago, what I shared was basically that although we feel that we may not have expectations within a relationship, from young, we are already habituated into developing the tendency to have expectations of everyone. So whilst we may not be consciously aware of expectations that we have of a certain relationship, subconsciously we always act out of this tendency to have such expectations. And the challenge here is that not everyone has the same expectations as us, and we don't share the same expectations as everyone because our expectations are formed or informed rather by our background, our upbringing, our experiences, our personal experiences, our culture, the exposure, the level of exposure that we've had to other sources of information and so on. And so when these expectations don't match with the expectations that someone else has, or these expectations don't match what is happening around us, then conflict arises. When I say conflict arises, I don't necessarily mean like actual, fisticuffs, like physical conflict. I mean that there's some kind of dissonance that we experience between what it is that we expect and what it is that we're experiencing. And so there's a level of discomfort there and dissatisfaction. 2 weeks ago, I also talked about how it will be very useful for us to realize that when someone behaves and acts in a certain way, it's not always about us, because we as human beings, we as sentient beings have a tendency to relate every interaction we have with others relative to ourselves. So we need to realize, or it will be beneficial for us to realize, that when somebody behaves and acts in a certain way, we may not necessarily be the trigger for it, that there may be something else going on in other aspects or other areas of their life that have spilled over to this particular aspect. So I talked about how as human beings we're not necessarily that good at compartmentalizing, and that for example, someone who is our boss may be having pressures elsewhere in work. Maybe they are getting pressure from upper management, from their own boss. Or maybe they are having pressures in a personal capacity. And so most people, unfortunately, are not that fantastic about compartmentalizing their emotions in one aspect of their life, and it usually tends to spill over into other areas of their life. And so whilst we may not necessarily be the trigger for someone's behavior, we may be the recipient of it. I also talked about how it would be very beneficial for us to morning Michael, good morning Iman, hi guys. So last week I also talked about how it may be beneficial for us sometimes to look past the tone of how somebody is delivering a message. And I gave the example of some people that I work with who tend to start interactions in a very accusatory manner. So they will say things like, Pastor Jinai. And, immediately the tone kind of takes me back, and I'm like, oh my God. And, I'm like on tenterhooks. And then the next sentence after that will be something super benign, like, would you like to have breakfast with me? And I'll be like, oh, okay then. So it's taken me some time to get used to the fact that the tone isn't necessarily reflective of what it is that they're thinking about or what it is that they mean. And some people just speak in that way. Some people are just sarcastic. Some people are just accusatory. Some people just speak in an angry way, but that is not how they actually are. So it would be helpful for us not to react to the tone, but to look beyond the tone and to look at the content, look at the message, and see if the message that they are conveying to us, the content that they're conveying to us, is helpful to our work, is directly related to our work, or if it's something that can just be set aside for now. So basically, what was that saying? Like water over a duck's back. I'm so sure I got that saying wrong, but like water rolling off a duck's back, all right? And then I also talked about how Rinpoche had advised us to meditate on the source or the cause of the experience that we're having. So if we're experiencing sarcasm, or indeed if we're experiencing jealousy, we're experiencing envy, pettiness, if we're on the receiving end of it, that it would be helpful for us to meditate on the cause of the experience that we're having, which is karma. And meditate on how we must have created the karma, not necessarily in previous lives, but even in this life, but in the past, to have this experience now, and how we should take steps to break the cycle and to stop creating the karma to have similar experiences in the future. So in other aspects of our lives, are we sarcastic to other people, or are we do we exhibit jealousy to other people? And so are we creating the causes in that aspect of our life to experience sarcasm, jealousy, and so on, let's say within the workplace? All right. I also talked about how Rinpoche had advices that it's beneficial for us to, if we wish to have a very straightforward way of breaking this cycle of having these types of experiences, that it would be very beneficial for us to apply the antidote. So the antidote being to react with kindness. So although it may not necessarily affect or change or impact, influence our experience immediately, it also still creates the causes for us to have pleasant experiences with other people in the future. So it may not change, in this case, it may not change our boss's mind now to react with us in a different way because we are reacting with kindness, but it's beneficial for us, it's beneficial for our practice to be able to meet somebody's sarcasm, to be able to meet somebody's anger, somebody's jealousy, and so on with kindness. All right, so that is in brief what I talked about last week in relation to the first question. The second question, I say last week, it was 2 weeks ago. The second question that we covered 2 weeks ago was, hello, thank you so much for going live. I'm new here, but I have watched Sam Rinpoche's videos. He was a master teacher. I agree with you. Can you please tell me what do we have to do to go into retreat in order to achieve rainbow body? Thanks. So 2 weeks ago, I talked about how rainbow body is when, as a result of our practice, we're able to alter the body's appearance and transform it into 5 radiant lights. And for the body of those practitioners to remain visible and to remain functional through the lights. And that there are certain signs that we can look for to ascertain if someone has achieved rainbow body or not. Whilst the person is alive, their bodies don't cast the shadow, whether it's under the glare of artificial light or under natural light, and that at death, the body shrinks dramatically in size. And there are no odors, and there are no odors that we smell, that we experience, that are commonly associated with decomposition. Instead, we smell fragrant smells or we smell perfumes, and that the common metric or the common measurement that's used by Tibetans to describe the size of this shrunken, reduced body is the size of or the length of a forearm. And other signs that are commonly associated with practitioners who have achieved rainbow body, and these signs appear at the time of death, at the time of their passing, is that exotic flowers will bloom at any time of the year, even in the dead of winter, or that there are rainbows in the sky. All right, so I talked about last week how 2 weeks ago, how if we wish to enter into retreat to achieve any particular result, not necessarily rainbow body, but any particular result, that it's very, very important for us to find a qualified guru, because our teacher is the foundation of all good qualities. And that's why reciting Yonten Shugima is very, very important. All right, so the foundation of all good qualities that we have developed, that we have the chance to develop, is our guru. Because without our guru who explains to us and who highlights to us aspects or qualities that we could do with some improvement on, and without the guru who actually guides us and gives us methods for such improvements or such transformation, it will be impossible for us to develop or to improve or to grow our good qualities. All right, and so the most important thing for any practice at all, to enter retreat into a specific yidam or to enter into retreat to gain specific results, is that we need to find a qualified guru who can give us the practice and who can guide us in the meditations. And this is not just specific to rainbow body. So being that the underlying success in spiritual practice is following and upkeeping our commitments to our teachers, the questions that we need to ask ourselves is, we need to check, how is our guru devotion? Are we respectful of our teacher? Do we follow our teacher's instructions, whether they are with us or whether they're no longer around, and whether their absence is physical or like temporarily or permanently? We need to check if we're upholding our commitments to them. So did we make any promises to our teacher? Not necessarily just vows, but promises like, every day I will do this, every week I will do this, once a year I'll do this. So are we upholding our promises and commitments that we've made to our teacher? And Rinpoche also explained, when we talk about guru devotion, it's not about servitude, but it's about practicing the teachings that our guru has transmitted to us, whether it's one line of teachings or whether it's an entire corpus, the entire corpus of Buddha's teachings. So are we kind? Are we giving? Do we make an effort to practice? Do we make an effort to do retreats? Do we make an effort to do meditations? Or are we always making excuses or finding reasons for not doing so? All right, so like I said, guru devotion isn't just about servitude. It isn't about being a slave to the guru. It's practicing what the guru has transmitted to us and what the guru has conveyed to us, and changing as a basis of that. And that is what real guru devotion is. So when we wish to seek higher practices, or when we wish to enter into retreat in order to gain a specific result, or in order to focus on a particular meditational deity, we need to find a guru. And why do we need to find a guru? Because we need to receive the practice. All right, we need the guru to be there to guide us, to teach us how to look out for specific signs, and to explain to us what it is that we're looking for. And so if we do a quick check and our guru devotion or practice of guru devotion isn't particularly fantastic, and there are aspects and areas that we could be improving on, then we need to think, if I were to enter into retreat in order to gain specific results, or in order to focus on a specific meditational deity, a specific yidam, will I gain results? If I'm always debating with my teacher, if I'm always doubting my teacher, if I'm always questioning my teacher, if my teacher gives me an instruction, do I follow it? Will I follow it normally? If my teacher tells me every single week, go and give food to stray dogs, and I don't follow such a simple instruction, and I'm not consistent in it, will I be able to remain consistent in my retreat? Have I developed the consistency to be consistent in my retreat? All right, so examine ourselves on a day-to-day basis. When people say something that we don't like, how do we react? When people do something that we don't agree with, how do we react? When people have a view that we don't agree with, how do we react? And from that, we can also extrapolate that kind of behavior onto our practice with our teacher, which is when our teacher says something, how do we react? Do we stay and persevere? to uphold the instruction, or do we reduce our involvement? Do we find other ways and find excuses to not uphold the commitment? And if we're doing that, then if our teacher were to give us instructions on how to do a specific retreat, and we don't like the idea of it, there are things that we doubt, then you need to think, will we go through with it? Will we go all the way with the practice in order to develop and achieve the results? All right. So before we even get into the topic of how do I achieve specific results specific results in my practice, we need to also think and check, how is my guru devotion? Because our guru devotion, our practice of guru devotion, and how good our guru devotion is going to be the basis, the foundation for all good qualities that we will develop. All right. And if you want to, look for evidence, look around at the people who you perceive to be very, very devoted to their teachers. As the years go by, does their practice improve? Do they change? Do they become nicer people? Do they become kinder people? Do they become more generous people? Do they become more patient people? Look at people like that and see. And if you see that their practice is developing year after year after year, if you see that the amount of work that they're taking on, the amount of responsibility, the amount of commitment that they're taking on is growing year after year after year, and they're transforming and they're changing, then you know that is a pretty good indication. Rinpoche always told us that is a pretty good indication that someone who grows in that manner is practicing guru devotion, because they are following the instructions that the teacher has given them. All right. So who ascertains if we're ready for higher practice? Who determines if we're ready to be initiated? Our guru. Do you need an example? Naropa. Naropa had to undergo so many trials and tribulations before he was ascertained and determined by his guru to be ready for higher practices. And what happened? As soon as Naropa was initiated into Vajragini practice, very, very quickly after that, he gained results. All right. So even within the stories of the Mahasiddhas, we can already see examples of people developing great attainments as a result of their practice of guru devotion. And therefore, it's our responsibility as students to ensure that when the time comes, we are appropriate receptacles, we are appropriate vessels in order to receive the practice. And so how do we do that? We start doing that by upholding our commitments, by holding on to our vows, by treating our vows as being more precious than our own lives, as it says in the prayers, and by following our teacher's instructions. All right. So that is a that is a half an hour recap of what happened 2 weeks ago. And if I'm not able to continue with this week's topic, then I will follow on to next week's topic. I'll give you guys cliffhangers. All right. So before we move on to today's subject, I want to do a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's sharing. This sponsor has chosen to remain anonymous, but would like to dedicate their contribution to dedicate it to me. And thank you for having this at this particular time of the day, as it's very auspicious for me. Actually, you shouldn't be thanking me. You should be thanking Beng Kui, because there are a lot of people who work quietly in the background, who do so many things to make sharings like this possible. So you think, JP is on, doing his meditation, mindful morning meditations. You see that Pastor Niril is on doing easy Dharma for the new normal. You see Pastor David doing his sharings. And yeah, people are in front of the camera talking, but there are so many people in the background who are working to make this happen. There are people who are figuring out, as mundane as it is, people are figuring out schedules, the best schedule that will fit everybody's time. There are people who are figuring things out from a technical point of view. So many people work to make these sharings possible. All right. So if you guys would like to say thank you to everyone who has been making these sharings possible, there are links in the description section of this video where you can sponsor a sharing and support the work that's being done. All right. Agnes, good luck at your hospital appointment. Please recite Om Benzo Wikibitana Soha on your way there, and request and believe and ask Doji Shukden to be with you. Whatever it is that you're going for, may the doctors be clear in their diagnosis, and may your treatments be effective. All right. So whilst you're there, on your way there, recite Om Benzang Wiki Bitana Soha. All right. So before we get into today's topic, what is today's topic actually? So obviously you probably know this because I already put it in the subject of this video. But today's topic is actually inspired by questions that were asked or that were received rather in the previous weeks. And that's about dealing with difficult people, specifically about dealing with difficult people in the workplace. All right, so again, remember guys, if you do have questions that you would like answered, please feel free to leave them in the comment section of this video, and I will either answer them as part of the video, do a new video for it, or answer it once the live stream is over. All right, so when we talk about difficult people, why is it that we talk about it in terms of people who we perceive to be difficult? All right, and if you guys do your sadhanas every day, which you should be doing, as part of your Ganden Lagyama, we are taught that as part of the visualization, we're supposed to visualize people whom we perceive to be difficult in front of us. So why do we talk about perceived to be difficult? So before we get into that, we need to talk about how difficulties and how conflict with other people arises. In general, conflict with other people arises because they do something that we don't like, or they say something that we don't agree with, or in this day and age, they type something that we don't agree with, or they have an opinion that we don't share. And at some point, it becomes tough, or it becomes difficult for us to find common ground with these people. And so, as it happens over and over again, and we find it difficult to come to a common understanding with somebody else, we start to avoid them. And in order to justify that, then we start to label such people as being difficult. So that person is so difficult to get along with, that person is so difficult to work with, that person is so difficult to convince, that person is so difficult because their opinions are so different from mine, that person is so difficult, and so on. So we keep justifying our avoidance of certain people as they are being difficult. All right? So difficulties often arise from people whom we perceive to be difficult. And why do we say perceive? Why do we say that it's linked to perception? Because, okay, in order to explain this, in order to answer this question, I'm going to use an example, and I'm going to use the example of a workplace. So, in a workplace, which most of you listening to right now should be familiar with, there is a dynamic. Okay, unless you're in one of those newfangled workplaces, you know, where it's a horizontal organizational chart. Everyone is on the same level as each other. There is no vertical, whatever. Unless you're in one of those places, there is a dynamic of employee and employer. There is a dynamic of boss and subordinate. And so, if you look at a workplace that most of us are familiar with, you'll find that within a set of circumstances, someone might be difficult, but outside of those set of circumstances, they are not. What do I mean by this? Look at your boss. So within a workplace, you may find that your boss is very arrogant. You may find that your boss is very demanding. You may find that your boss is very sarcastic. You may find that your boss doesn't give you credit where it's due, and so on. All right, there are so many things and so many reasons that we can find our boss to be difficult within a workplace. But we also need to realize that our boss is only our boss within that set of circumstances. That outside of the setting of a workplace, our boss is somebody else's husband, somebody else's wife, someone else's mother, father, daughter, son, partner. And outside of the workplace, they mean something else to somebody else. It's only within the workplace that they are our boss to us. And so outside of the workplace, outside that set of circumstances, our boss being somebody else's mother, father, husband, wife, whatever, they may be someone who's very loving. They may be someone who's very generous. They may be someone who's very warm. They may be somebody who's very nurturing, who gives great advice, someone who's full of care, and so on. So how can the same person be difficult within the workplace and be not difficult somebody else? Why is it that that same person is difficult to us but not difficult to somebody else? And the reason why there is that difference, there is that contrast, is based on our perception. based on our relationship with that person, based on that set of circumstances that we share with that person. All right, so it's based on our preferences, it's based on our experiences, and it's based on our history with them. Excuse me. Which means that set of circumstances that we're experiencing, the fact that we find somebody difficult, being based on our preferences, on our experiences with them, on our history with them, that is personal to us. It's not shared necessarily by others. All right, it may be shared by other people in your workplace, but it's not necessarily shared by everyone in the world. Not every single person in the world will find someone to be difficult. For example, Steve Jobs. Right? There are all kinds of stories about Steve Jobs' genius. Equally, there are all kinds of stories about how he was very difficult to work for, or sometimes very difficult to interact with. But there are also stories about how he was very generous with people and very meticulous. So some people may find a certain person, a certain boss's way to be difficult, but some people may find that boss's way to be very meticulous. So being that it's personal to us and it's not shared by other people, that's why we talk about it in terms of perception, that we perceive somebody to be difficult. Because if that person was inherently difficult, if that person was by nature difficult, then everyone would share that opinion with us. Everybody would find that person as equally difficult as we do. But aren't there people that you yourself find difficult, and then when you go and complain about that difficult person to your friends will say, hey, that's not my experience with them. I don't find them to be like that. They're always very nice to me. Why is it that you find that person to be so difficult? So even within our own experience, even within our own lives, excuse me, we can already see that there are certain people whom we find to be very, very difficult, that other people don't share the same opinion as us. All right, so if a person, the key takeaway here is that if a person is inherently difficult, everyone would find that person difficult. That person will be universally difficult. But the fact that a difficult person can be deemed to be less difficult when you change the circumstances means that that difficulty is the result of our perception. It's what we perceive to be difficult. It's personal to us based on our preferences, based on our experiences with them, based on our history with them. All right. So the fact that we or only a specific group of people find someone to be difficult means that it's based on our perception, it's based on how we perceive them, and it's based on our relationship with them. Now, whilst I'm talking about how we can work on, before I talk about how we can work or why we should work on our perception and changing it so that we can have better relationships with other people, it may be that you might be thinking, Pastor G and I need proof of this. Why should I go through all the effort of this if I don't think that there will be a result, or if I don't think that there will be a change? I need proof, and fair enough, all right? You need proof. Good morning, James. Hello, Phoebe. Oh man, Phoebe, you should bring Xiao Gua here. Haven't seen you for so long. All right, so before I get into talking about why we should change and work on our perception in order to improve our relationships with other people and in order to start perceiving fewer people as being difficult, what proof, what evidence do I have that changing perception will change our environment, change our behavior, will change our experiences and relationships with other people? So, as I was preparing for this talk, or this sharing rather, I remembered something that I learned, 15 years ago in university. When I was studying psychology, we studied a very, very famous example, which you may be familiar with. It's called the Stanford Prison Experiment, which was conducted by Zimbardo, Philip Zimbardo, I think. But in brief, during this experiment, people who had no prior relationship with one another were separated into two different groups. When I say people, I mean volunteers. Okay, so volunteers who had no prior relationship with one another were separated into two different groups. One group was designated as being wardens, and another group was designated as being prisoners. And what they found as a result of the experiment was that those who were designated as being wardens, although they had shown no prior signs of being especially aggressive or especially violent and so on, what Zimbardo found was that as a result, purely as a result of being designated as you are warden, you are jailer, you are the one who's in charge of the prisoners and in charge of making sure that this prison runs smoothly, people developed aggressive tendencies. They developed a higher instance, or they showed more tendency to break rules and then justify the rule breaking. They showed more tendencies of becoming over the top. So if, for example, I'm not saying that this is part of the experiment, just giving you an example, but if, let's say, the rule was, if you drop a cup and break a cup, you have to do 20 push-ups, the wardens would make you do 25 push-ups, or they will make you do 25 push-ups in the shower, or make it more difficult than what it needed to be. And they found that people who were designated as wardens had no hesitation or no reluctance about inflicting cruelty on somebody else. What they also found was that people who were designated as prisoners became more submissive. Some of them became more aggressive because they wanted to fight against the rules, but over time this aggression was replaced by submission. They found that people who were designated as prisoners started questioning themselves, started questioning their own self-worth, their own self-esteem, their own idea of self, and they started becoming more suggestible and more, basically more submissive and more accepting of the cruelties that were being inflicted on them. So, in this new situation, you have to remember that this entire thing was fabricated. So they were put in an environment that was completely fabricated, and a bunch of people were told, you are going to be the jailers, you're going to be the wardens, and another bunch of people were told, you're going to be prisoners. And so in this new situation, when they were given new labels about who they are, and when their perception of themselves were changed, their behavior changed. And their behavior towards other people changed, and their interaction and their relationship with other people changed. So in a new situation, when their perception of themselves and their perception of other people changed, and when they were given authority over other people, or their authority or their, what's the word? I want to say sovereignty, but I know it's not right. But their independence was removed from them. Very quickly, everything changed because they were given a new set of rules, they were given a new set of environments, and they were given a set of new circumstances. And so when their perception changed, their behavior changed. Now, when I raise this experiment or use this experiment as an example, that's it, Joyce, autonomy, thank you. When I use this experiment as an example, what I want to point out first is that this experiment wasn't intended to prove the point that I'm trying to make here. All right, so when I use this as an experiment, as an example, I'm not trying to go back to what it is that they were trying to prove as a result of the experiment. And I am aware that there are also questions about the methodology and the ethics behind this experiment. I'm very well aware of that, okay? But what I'm trying to say in raising this experiment as an example is that it shows that when a person's perception, morning, Jason. So it shows that when a person's perception of someone else changes, it changes as a result of the environment and as a result of the circumstances and the variables being altered. And that when someone is placed as a warden, their perception of the other group is altered. Their perception of their relationship with the other group is altered. Their perception of themselves is altered. They start seeing themselves as being in a position of authority and other people being in a position of being subordinate to them. And so as a result of that change of circumstances and that change of dynamic in the relationship, their behavior changed. All right, so in this experiment, it showed that when a person's perception of themselves is that I'm in a position of authority, immediately their perception of somebody else changed, and therefore they started thinking of somebody else as being less deserving of humanity, being less deserving of humane treatment, being less deserving of dignity, and being less deserving of compassion and so on. Now, it also the more important point about raising this experiment as an example is that when we change our perception, we can change our behavior and we can change our relationship with somebody else. And so when, in the case of this experiment, when somebody's perception changed, it changed the relationship for the worse, it changed the dynamics for the worse. But just as much as changing perception can change a dynamic for the worse, a changing perception can also change a dynamic for the better. In this case, changing perception led somebody to be less compassionate, led somebody to be less humane, led somebody to be, led somebody to be more prone to treating other people with less dignity. It can also go the other way if we change our perception towards other people. All right, so the point is that perception alters behavior, perception alters attitudes, perception alters our relationship and our approach with our interactions and our dynamics with other people. It can change to the worse if you put somebody as warden and you put somebody as subordinate, and so the wardens become horrible, the subordinates become submissive. It can change for the better when we learn, for example, to view everybody as being our teacher, to view everybody as being somebody that we can practice with, to view everyone as our mother, and therefore everyone being deserving of kindness as much as we are kind to our own parents, as much as our own parents have been kind to us, regardless of our actual relationship with them or regardless of how those people have actually treated us. So it can go both ways, all right? So the point here is that if you want to improve your relationship with other people, if you want to start viewing other people as, or perceiving other people as being not difficult or less difficult, what we need to do is we need to change our perception of them in order to change how we perceive other people as being difficult. I hope that made sense. Right? So you might be asking, why do I need to do the work? Or why do I need to do the hard work of changing? Why can't they change? Why can't they be the ones to be less difficult so that I don't find them difficult? Okay, number one, maybe they're not in a position to change. And it could be something as simple as they are being older. Why? What Rinpoche explained is that the older you are, the more difficult it is for some people to change. The old saying goes, right, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But what Rinpoche explained was that when somebody has been habituated or developed or spent the last 50 years developing a certain tendency, it's very difficult for people to break through that 50 years of habituation compared to someone who has only spent 20 years developing the same tendency. I am aware that there are other variables that will affect this statement, right? For example, like greater exposure, greater experience, and so on. But the general rule is that if you spend 50 years developing a habit, it's going to be much harder to break than if you've only spent 5 years developing the habit, 10 years developing the habit, 20 years developing the habit. So maybe sometimes people are not in a position to change purely because of time, because they spend far more time developing or cementing that habit, that tendency. Maybe somebody is not aware that they need to change. And to make them aware of it may not necessarily be the most productive thing to do because it could deteriorate the relationship further. Some people just don't like being made aware of certain things. Maybe they're not in an environment that is supportive of them to change. And the most clear example that jumps to mind is when people are abusing substances. So if someone is abusing substances and they go into rehab to try and break the habit, what is the first thing that they're told that they should do as soon as they leave rehab, as soon as they've recovered? Don't go back into the environment that you were in previously, because if you hang out with the same people that you were in previously, it may lead you to relapse. So perhaps it's the same thing with habits that we developed over time. You can use the same logic rather, that if someone has developed the tendency to react at everything with anger, that if they may be in an environment that's not supportive of them to change, to stop reacting in that way. For example, they may not be in a Dharma environment that may actually make them aware of their need to change and then give them the tools to change. So, why is it that I need to change? Why is it that they can't change? Because if you wait for them to change, it may never happen. you may be waiting for a very, very long time, and it will never happen. It may never happen. And in the meantime, whilst you're waiting for them to change, you're still suffering. So if you want to suffer less sooner, it would be more practical for us to talk about and to look at changing our perception of other people rather than waiting for other people to change. It doesn't mean that they won't change. It doesn't mean that they can't change. But if you want faster results, then you got to be the one to do the hard work. You got to be the one to do the dirty work and to change your perception, all right? The parable, that very famous parable comes to mind. If the entire world is covered with glass, would it be faster? Would it make more sense for you to cover the whole world with vegan leather so that you don't cut your feet? Or would it make more sense for you to cover your feet with vegan leather and not cut yourself on the glass, all right? So that parable, which I hope everyone who's listening to this is aware of, demonstrates that it's much faster, much more effective, much more practical for us to look at changing our perception rather than to force change onto somebody else. Why is it worthwhile for us to work on our perception? Like I said, if you wait for someone else to change, it may never happen, and in the meantime, whilst you're waiting for them, you're suffering. Suffering from what? You're suffering from missed opportunities. You're suffering from poor interpersonal relationships. You're suffering from disappointment. You're suffering from envy. You're suffering from pain. You're suffering from jealousy, and so on. So, when you have that perception that somebody else is difficult, you may miss out on opportunities to do other things. Why? Well, for example, when you say that you don't want to get involved and so on in something, don't want to get involved in a project because somebody else is being difficult, that you find the person who's leading the project to be difficult, that you find the other people who are involved in the project to be difficult, the only person who's losing out on the benefits of being involved in the project is you. For example, if you don't want to volunteer in something, if you don't want to help out in something, and so on, because you find the other people who are participating in the activity to be difficult, the only person who's losing out is you, right? So what Rinpoche always advised us, or shared with us rather, is that when someone can tolerate a difficult person, they can raise funds. When someone can tolerate a difficult person, they can learn new skills. Why? Because they are able to look beyond the perceived difficulty to focus on the goal that they want to accomplish. So when you want and when you change your perception, what happens is that by changing your perception, it opens up an entirely new realm of experiences for you. You'll find it easier to accomplish your goals because the things that you want to achieve, which sometimes involve your participation with difficult people, they become more achievable because you don't avoid that participation, you don't avoid that activity, you don't avoid that decision on the basis of who's involved with it. Like Rinpoche explained, you are able to look beyond the perceived difficulty to focus on the goal and accomplish the goal. When you change your perception, another benefit is that your moods also stabilize. Why? Because people are no longer in control of your experiences and therefore no longer in control of your moods. Whatever it is that people do, whether it's difficult or not, or whether you perceive it to be difficult or not, it no longer affects you negatively unless you allow it to affect you. Another benefit of changing your perception is that, very prosaic, very mundanely, you end up making more new friends. Why? Because you recognize that whatever it is that you experience with other people is the result of your perception. And so if you change your perception of them, it opens up the number of people that you can be friends with, that you can interact with. It ends up that you can hang out with anybody at all, that you can tap into their knowledge, that you can tap into their resources, that you can tap into their skills and so on. The example that I want to give to you guys is Rinpoche. No matter who it was that Rinpoche interacted with, no matter who it was that Rinpoche met, whether they were young or old, whether they were rich or poor, whether they were difficult or not difficult, Rinpoche was able to interact with everybody, to hold a conversation with everybody, and more than that, more importantly than that, Rinpoche was able to convey Dharma to them and benefit them. Why? Because Rinpoche looked beyond what it is that they are exhibiting now, what kind of behavior they're exhibiting now, and Rinpoche realized and understood that that is not who they really are. And by looking beyond that, Rinpoche was able to focus on the goal that Rinpoche wanted to accomplish, which was to transmit and convey Dharma to them for their benefit. All right, so what I do want to say as I'm talking about this is, when I talk about difficult people, I'm referring to people who are generally difficult. All right, so the people in the office who don't want to listen to your ideas, the people in the office who are talking behind your back all the time, the people at home who are not supportive of your initiatives or your endeavors or your dreams or your ambitions, your husband or your wife whom you perceive to be not supportive of you because when you come home after a long day of work, why haven't the dishes been done, for example? All right, so when I talk about difficult people, I'm talking about people who are generally difficult. I'm not talking about people who are mentally or physically or emotionally abusive. All right, sometimes difficult people do fall under the category of being abusive, wherein they are such difficult people, it is actually abusive. The best example being Rinpoche's adoptive mother, who was an incredibly difficult person, and as a result of her being so difficult, became abusive towards Rinpoche. So does it mean that when I talk about difficult people, it means that we have to put up with it and think, oh, well, it's my perception of them being difficult, so I should put up with this abuse? No. All right? First of all, if someone is beating you up physically, it's not your perception, it's actually happening. You are being beaten up. So you can't perceive that someone is causing physical harm to you. If your arm is broken, you can't perceive that someone's causing physical harm to you. Second thing is that we may not necessarily be prepared to deal with that abusive environment at the moment. Whilst we may not be prepared to deal with it at the moment, I do also want to point out that changing our perception can also change the amount that we suffer during and after the incident, or during and after the experience. For example, which I raised many weeks ago, 27 weeks ago, Sawa Putok Rinpoche. Sawa Putok Rinpoche was imprisoned for 20 years as a result of the Cultural Revolution, and during that time, as a result of his rank, Sawa Putok Rinpoche was beaten, was tortured, electrocuted with cattle prods and so on. Sawa Putok Rinpoche experienced extreme physical abuse. But how was it that he was able to withstand it and to go through it without coming out angry, without coming out bitter, without coming out depressed? He was able to undergo that extreme physical abuse because of his approach and his attitude to the suffering. Sawa Putok Rinpoche perceived his guards to be the ones who are suffering, to be people who are actually suffering. Sawa Putok Rinpoche perceived his suffering to be the ripening of his karma. Sawa Putok Rinpoche visualized that whatever extreme physical abuse he was experiencing at the moment, he was purifying the karma and removing obstacles for Ganden, Sera and Drepung to be re-established in exile. Alright, so when we come up against extreme physical abusive environments, do we need to put up with it? If we're not prepared and we're not equipped to deal with it, you need to move yourself away from that environment, that situation. But how much we suffer after the experience is a matter of changing our perception. How come some people can go through extremely traumatic experiences, but when they come out of it, they're not angry, they're not traumatized, they're not depressed? Because of their perception of the experience. Alright, so Rinpoche did explain before that sometimes we are not necessarily prepared to deal with all of the difficult people that we come across. Not all of us are at the level of practice of someone, for example, like Sawa Putok Rinpoche, to be able to deal with it effectively, beneficially for both parties. So yes, sometimes it is necessary for us to take a step back. Sometimes it's necessary for us to remove ourselves from that situation. Sometimes it's necessary to give ourselves a break and then to reapproach the situation with a different attitude, with a different perspective. Rinpoche himself did it. When Rinpoche was experiencing extreme physical, emotional, violent abuse from his adoptive parents, Rinpoche left. Rinpoche left New Jersey and ran away to Los Angeles. Why did Rinpoche do it? Was it to take revenge? No. Was it to hurt his parents? No. All Rinpoche wanted to do was focus on the goal of becoming ordained, focus on the goal of becoming a monk, focus on the goal of pursuing a spiritual life. That was the reason why Rinpoche left, because the abusive environment was making it very difficult for Rinpoche to accomplish his goals. So yes, we have examples in front of us when you are in an abusive environment, when a person is being extremely difficult to you, that you do need to remove yourself from it. All right? Now, before I get into how do we work on our perception? It's not that much longer, all right? 4 minutes. How do we work on our perception? If we wish to deal with difficult people, how is it that we can work on changing our perception? You may have picked up some clues from what I talked about, or what I just shared, which is that the easiest and most straightforward way in order for us to work on our perception is by applying and by practicing the 8 verses of mind transformation. Now you might be thinking, Pastor Jinai, this is so boring. You have brought this up so many times. Why do I need to hear it again? Why do I keep bringing it up? Because, first of all, it was one of Rinpoche's favorite prayers and it was one of Rinpoche's favorite practices. All right? Rinpoche talked about this many times. Rinpoche had it painted, installed at the entrance of Kechara house, the old Kechara house. So this was a prayer and a practice that was extremely important to Rinpoche. I also bring it up because you don't have to be Buddhist in order to practice and in order to benefit from the principles which are shared and the guidelines which are shared within the 8 verses of mind transformation. It's just pure practicality. It's a practical approach. If something happens this way, behave this way. If this occurs, this is the antidote. If this happens, this is this should be your reaction. This is the reaction that you should have. At the same time, the 8 verses of mind transformation, appearing as being so simple and being so straightforward, in actuality is extremely deep. And it is a typical example of how we have a tendency to overlook certain practices as being too basic, as being too simple, or I'm more advanced than that. I know what the 8 verses are all about. I have studied it for so many years. That being the case, although we may have studied it for so many years, although we may perceive ourselves to be more advanced than that, how many of us have actually really truly practiced and mastered the 8 verses of mind transformation? Better yet, how many of us have actually memorized the 8 verses of mind transformation? If it's so short, if it's so simple, if it's so easy, how many of us actually memorized it? And then beyond that, how many of us have actually mastered it? And how many of us have actually realized it enough that it informs and it guides every single interaction that we have with other people? So when we ask our gurus, can I have Tantra? When we ask our gurus, I want to be initiated into Vajrayogini, we also need to think, how much of this basic practice of the 8 verses of mind transformation have we actually applied and have we actually mastered? All right, so how can we work on changing our perception of other people? How can we work on changing our perception of people whom we perceive to be difficult? By practicing the 8 verses of mind transformation. Rinpoche also explained that we can work on our perception by meditating on other people. In this case, by meditating on the difficult person's good qualities. What are the kind things that this other person has done? Is their behavior aggressive or is their behavior assertive? Are they difficult with just me or are they difficult with everyone? If I were to change and if I were to change the environment, if I were to remove them from this relationship and put them in another environment, in a different set of circumstances, would they still be difficult? What other things is this person talented at? Could what it is I perceive to be their weaknesses be viewed as a strength in a different situation? And that was something that Rinpoche was extremely good at, was identifying somebody's so-called weakness and then putting them in an environment where it became a strength. Rinpoche also advised us that we should meditate on other people as being sentient beings. Have they not been my mother in a previous life? Is my mother in this life kinder to me compared to my mother from a previous life? No, they are the same. The level of kindness that I've experienced from my mother or my parents in my previous life is the same as the kindness that I've experienced from my parents in this life. Have I not been their mother in a previous life, and so on? So, do I retaliate now that my ex-mother is being difficult to me? Would I retaliate against my own parents from this life? If I would not, then why should I retaliate against my parents from a previous life? Is the person I perceive to be difficult any different from me? Is the person that I perceive to be difficult less deserving of wanting to be happy, less deserving of happiness? Is the person I perceive to be difficult someone who has less desire to be happy, someone who desires to have less suffering? Why are they behaving this way? What is the root cause of their behavior? Would I behave differently if I were in their position? Do I behave the same as them in a different situation? Am I perceived to be difficult by other people? As much as I perceive person A to be difficult, am I person A for somebody else? Am I somebody else's difficult person? When other people are doing their meditations for Ganen Hagyama, when other people are doing their visualizations for Ganen Hagyama, am I the person that person visualizes to be in front of them? Am I the other person that somebody else visualizes and perceives to be difficult? So when you think in this way that Rinpoche asked us to do, what happens is that we break down the barriers between ourselves and other people. What happens is that we realize that other people want exactly the same things as us, other people are exactly the same as us, other sentient beings are exactly the same as us. And so what puts us in a position to perceive someone else as being difficult and then to treat them as such when we may be perceived as difficult to somebody else? You might be thinking, oh my God, how do I apply that in real life, Pastor Jinai? How do I practice the 8 verses of mind transformation in real life? How do I meditate on other people as other people's good qualities? How do I meditate on other people as not being difficult? How do I meditate on other people as being sentient beings just like me and wanting the same things as me? It's fantastic as a theory, Pastor Jinai. It's so great, it's so beautiful, it's so wonderful, whatever. But where's the practical application? How do I do it on a day-to-day basis? How do I do it in real life? It's so impractical. It's not. I want to tell you guys this, it's not. And I can give you a real-life personal example of this. When I was a child, my sister and I got into a huge argument. And I don't remember what it was. I don't remember what we were fighting about, but it was huge. We were screaming at each other. We were punching, slapping. It was physical. We were really going at each other's throats. So, my dad came out of his room and then he got us by the ear and then yanked us together. And then after, my dad never showed this kind of anger ever. So when he did this and then pulled us, together, it was like, oh my God. First of all, it was a shock already. Stopped us dead in our tracks. Then my dad made us face each other. And then my dad said, both of you shut up. Stop arguing. We're like, okay. I want you to think of 5 good things about your sister. And then immediately I was like, yeah, but that, and I started debating back to my father. My dad's like, shut up, listen to me. I want you to think of 5 good things about your sister. And I want you to tell her 5 good things about her. And I was like, and then my dad turned and said, you, to my sister, I want you to think of 5 good things about your sister and I want you to tell her 5 good things about her. me and my sister were like, like fighting it. We were like, no, but she did this to me, and no, she started it. Typical kids. My dad said, shut up, do it now. So, hands, my dad's hands were still on our ears. We were like, crying and all that. And then through the tears, we were like, I was like, she's generous. Every time I want something, she always gives it to me. It was really difficult to come up with 5 good things about my sister at that time. Because I was so caught up in being angry. I was so caught up in getting my revenge. I was so caught up in being hurt that it was extremely difficult to come up with 5 good things. But hand on ear, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't escape. So I had to sit there and come up with 5 good things. By the time I came up to the 5th thing, the dry heaving of my crying had calmed down. I wasn't like, like hyperventilating anymore. So I got through the 5 things. And then after I got through my 5 things, my dad turns to my sister and goes, your turn. So my sister had to start with her 5 good things about me. And then, sure enough, by the end of her 5 things, she had stopped hyperventilating as well. What happened there? In that example, my dad immediately forced us to stop and to change the way we see somebody else. My dad immediately forced us to stop and change our perception of each other. And I saw a meme about this the other day online, and it said, if I can find reasons to hate you, I can find reasons to love you. So my dad immediately forced us to stop finding reasons to hate the other person and forced us to start finding reasons to love each other. By yanking on our ears, and I don't suggest this, but by yanking on our ears, my dad also immediately stopped us from getting caught up in this train wreck and this runaway train of anger and disappointment and hurt and all of that. He forced us to immediately meditate on the other person's good qualities. Not just meditate, but then verbally recognize and acknowledge it and to express it. Forced us to acknowledge and to verbalize that the other person has qualities which are praiseworthy and which are admirable. Excuse me. So what happened as a result of this interaction, as a result of this intervention rather, when my sister and I were forced to change our perception of the other person whom we perceived to be difficult at the time, immediately our anger reduced. Immediately, all the emotion that we were swept up away in was gone. Immediately, our frustration at each other reduced. When we were forced immediately to meditate on the other person's good qualities and to realize that the other person has qualities which are admirable, which are worthy of respect, which are worthy of praise, our focus shifted from the person's difficult qualities, from the person's irritating qualities, and it shifted so that our irritation at them also reduced. It shifted to something that was positive. Alright? Immediately, we were forced to practice and to implement the antidote. I'm not saying that I'm not saying that this experience was particularly pleasant, and I'm not saying that this experience was particularly comfortable, because I was dry heaving, I was hyperventilating, I was very unhappy about having to say all these good things about my sister after I had just spent 10, 15, 20 minutes screaming, about all of her bad qualities. I was very unhappy about having to recognize her good qualities. I'm not saying that it was comfortable at all to do this. And I'm not saying that as we get older, we will always come across situations which are easy or which are comfortable to deal with. All right, as we get older, our boss is not going to pull us on our ears, drag us into the break room, and then force us to recognize the good qualities of the other people that we work with. Our group project supervisor is not going to, sit us down with other people and then tell us that you need to recognize the 5 good qualities about your project mates so that you can get along with them better and so that we can accomplish this goal and this task. I'm not saying that as we get older, all of this is always going to be possible. I'm not saying that it's always going to be comfortable or that it's always going to be easy. What I am saying is that it is possible. It is possible because I've been compelled to do it, physically compelled to do it myself before. It is possible because if you can do it once, you can do it again. And if you can develop habits which you find very, very comfortable, you can also develop habits that are initially uncomfortable but become comfortable over time as we grow our habituation, as we grow our tendency to react in this way. All right? So, as usual, I've completely run out of time. Before I go this week, if you guys have any questions, if you guys have anything that you want me to clarify, please feel free to leave me a comment in the description section of this video, and I'll get to it once the video is over, film a new video about it, or answer as part of next week's video. All right. Before I go, just want to ask you guys, please reflect in the past week. If there have been people whom you have found or perceived to be difficult, and how you could have dealt with that difficulty differently. Maybe you are a parent and you've got a child, and your child has been, coming up to you and complaining, this person at school is so difficult, blah, blah, blah. Perhaps you could, I don't know, implement the solution that my dad presented to me and my sister, and get your child to talk about the 5 good qualities about that person whom they perceive to be difficult in school. Maybe develop that, or start developing that habituation in them, that tendency in them. All right, so reflect on the past week about people whom you may have perceived to have been difficult, and if they truly are difficult, or if there can be adjustments or tweaks or little changes made to our perception of them, so that it will change our experience and the dynamics of our relationship with them. And then as you move forward into the new week, the next time you find someone to be difficult, stop for a second and think, is it just me who's finding them difficult? Is it just me finding them difficult within this environment? And perhaps if I were to interact with them outside of this environment, they wouldn't be difficult anymore. So is it them who is being difficult, or is it my perception? Next time they talk to me and, I feel like my back's up against the wall and I feel extremely uncomfortable, is there something I can do, something I can say that will change the dynamics of this relationship, that will change the dynamics of this interaction with them? Can I do it even though I feel extremely uncomfortable about it? Can I do it although I feel extremely at ill ease about this, or unsettled about this? How will it benefit me to do so? All right, so let's try and work on that as we move into this new week. Given that everything in the world is constantly changing at the moment, let's try this. All right. Before I go, quick reminders: tonight, 10 p.m. Doju Shukden Sadhana on the Chinese Kechara Facebook fan page. So if you have any requests for prayers or for offerings to be made, leave me a message here. You can send them a message there. We will get to it. On Tuesday, there's Easy Dharma for the new normal at 9:30 p.m. Malaysian time. All of these times are Malaysian time. I believe with Pastor Nirol on the Kechara Facebook fan page. Then on Thursday at 8 p.m. Malaysian time on the San Rinpoche Relic Stupa. Oh, no, sorry. The Kecharan and Friends group. There is the San Rinpoche Swift Return Puja live stream. And then on Thursday at 10 p.m. Malaysian time, there is a special live streaming with JP and Lee Kim on the San Rinpoche Paranormal Zone Facebook page. So they will be having a discussion about one of Lee Kim's paranormal episodes which appeared on TV. All right. Don't forget to do your dedications once this live stream ends. I will do mine myself over here. And again, thank you so much to the sponsor of today's sharing, and to all of the sponsors of all of the weeks before. Like I explained at the beginning of this video, your contributions and your support helps us to continue to make these sharings possible. Not just for the speakers who have the privilege of appearing in front of the camera, but for all of the people who work in the background to make it possible. All right. So thank you guys so much for your support. I guess with that, I will see you same time, same place next week. Have a fantastic week, and please don't forget to be kind to each other. All right. Bye, guys.